modern digital business initiatives, if you look at IoT, if you look at AI, machine learning, stem off from things in machines and people outside the data center. So, which means digital business is literally a distributed computing framework, which is part of the compute probably has to happen outside the data center, partly within the data center, and some probably in the public cloud. So the essence of edge computing is basically creating that infrastructure where the data is being created or somewhere near that, so as to process that data and provide insights locally. Think about manufacturing shop floors, think about predictive maintenance there. So if you can aggregate all the sensor data from various assets in the plant and process and simulate basically predictions and failures and predict failures in a more efficient manner, that's what edge computing would give you. Think about use cases like sensor fusion, where you have different data types coming from different sources. How do you basically merge them together and process that data? So you can't do that in the cloud because it's not going to be very economical to send all that kind of data, particularly if you're looking at video and audio data and things like that. So what edge computing would help you do is basically process most of that data, heavy data, where it's being created, and you basically only send what's relevant to the public cloud or your IoT cloud from where it's deployed. So that's really the fundamental reason why edge computing is becoming popular. The other is, of course, limited autonomy is another use case, which is if your environment goes down, if the network goes down, you do not want to be getting in a situation where you're helpless. You need the applications and data processing happening exactly in that particular location. Think about offshore oil refineries, remote mines, who have very limited network bandwidth. So you can't really have a distributed application environment where part of the environment runs in the public cloud, part on-premise. You could probably connect to those networks intermittently, but most of the processing should happen locally and serve the application and users at the endpoint itself. So that's another motivation for edge computing to become quite popular. So from a process standpoint and the way data centers are operated today, I think DevOps is definitely going to be much more mature than what we see today. It's going to be probably one of the ways most of the digital business initiatives will be implemented. We will also see proliferation of AI ML as a very critical use case within the organization. We've spoken to CIOs, and a significant number of CIOs say they are running a artificial intelligence machine learning project initiative within the organization. So we're seeing that getting a significant uptake, and over a period of time will end up with certain level of maturity. We also find technologies such as hyperconverged systems, which I just mentioned, slowly entering the market. We expect by 2020, that is next year, about 30% of data center footprint is going to run hyperconverged systems infrastructure. So that's going to, again, force a lot of IT infrastructure managers to rethink how their data centers infrastructure has to be designed. Initiatives such as RPA, which is the ability to automate business processes, is getting widespread. Widespread recognition. A lot of enterprises think they can save a significant of money by automating business processes, and we've seen enterprises worldwide be able to demonstrate that as well. So they have been able to significantly reduce the amount of people as well as the cost taken to execute a particular business process. So I would say robotic process automation, RPA, would be another disruptive technology. Over the next decade, 5G also would probably bring its own set of disruption. When you look at the ability of endpoint to upload and download at gigabit speed, upload and download, there are newer use cases that would emerge, particularly in healthcare and transportation and metro level use cases for smart cities. So we begin to expect 5G is going to disrupt how computing will take place. 5G will shape what we call edge and public cloud to a more of a distributed computing framework. So that's another potential opportunity or potential technology disruption that may occur in the next decade. So most enterprises today have mostly a reactive way of monitoring environments. They measure and monitor availability and various other aspects of various other elements within the data center itself, performance, capacity and availability and things like that. The challenge, however, is we do not look at it from a holistic standpoint, an end-to-end standpoint, which means there are very few tools basically that can map the entire stack right from the application to the infrastructure and give very deep insights and granular insights on what needs to be done. So that market is evolving. We now see something called AI ops, which is the use of artificial intelligence in data center operations. So what that means is the platform itself will learn and predict when a particular asset might fail or when a particular application might have some sort of a downtime or performance impact, and provide proactive suggestions to the end user. So we get to a point where IT operations management or IT monitoring is getting more predictive rather than a reactive approach. So I think that's probably the way forward for IT infrastructure monitoring. So the industry has moved from something called hybrid storage arrays, which is systems that have both flash SSDs as well as SAS-based hard drives. And we're transitioning from there to something called solid state arrays, which is systems that have all flash SSDs, which is everything, every SSD, every component is an SSD based storage entity, and you've got the same architecture in the backend, which is dual. Let me redo that. Okay, so I'm going to give a couple of seconds and restart. So, right. So in the storage industry is now transitioned from what we call hybrid arrays, which is systems that have both a combination of SSDs and HDDs, to a solid state array system technology, which is storage systems that are only based out of SSDs. Now we're seeing another transition in that area, which is solid state arrays are moving from SAS based SSDs to something called NVMe based SSD technology, which is again is a rapidly evolving market with some amount of performance improvement in that regard. But what we are seeing is an interesting an increasing interest from a lot of end users about solid state arrays and primarily NVMe here in India, and how that can solve the problem of performance latency. Remember, we're already getting 5x to 7x more performance than hybrid arrays with the modern solid state array. So what is really a compelling need to move to NVMe SSAs is sort of questionable, but we're getting a lot of interest from customers saying, hey, what is NVMe based SSA and what's the implication of it in the data center? So as that market evolves in the next 3 to 5 years, we'll be very curious to see what sort of applications would best fit those NVMe based SSA storage systems. So what the sort of synergy in those ecosystems is, and we'll be very curious how those things will play out in the future. So most CIOs now recognize and acknowledge that the backup infrastructure essentially is the last resort for recovery. So if there is a ransomware attack, then people would inadvertently look at the backup infrastructure to basically make a safe recovery, which means the backup infrastructure really needs to be protected from ransomware attacks, or it has to be highly secure and isolated. So CIOs are beginning to re-evaluate their backup infrastructure. They're looking at creating an air-gapped environment for their backup infrastructure with limited access to limited number of users. They're also looking at things like how do I basically predict or assess if there's a ransomware attack on my backup file system. So we are seeing backup vendors basically take a step ahead and basically think about creating platforms that would proactively do that for them. It would analyze the type of file changes and immediately alert the backup admin if there's a big file change, which is a significant indicator that there is indeed a ransomware attack. So we are seeing vendors step up the game and basically innovate when it comes to protecting the backup infrastructure from ransomware attacks. And at the same time, a realization from the end users, the CIOs and IT infrastructure managers about how best to protect these, how best to use these tools. So I think over the next 2 to 3 years, we will see a significant effort from CIOs and IT infrastructure managers to re-architect their backup infrastructure.
For more updates from CXO TV, please like and subscribe to our channel.